Welcome back to Bible Basics for New Believers. My name is Ray. I want to remind you that these series we want to emphasize how you can read the Bible with both understanding and confidence. Today we will be looking at the last of the historical books. This video builds on material from previous videos, which there is a link for above and below. Last time we left off, we see where God had provided a land for the people of Israel. Now as we enter 1 Samuel, we will see where God now provides a king. We now are going to look at the book of 1 Samuel. Samuel is not the most well-known of the judges, but actually he is the most significant. He was not only a judge, but he was also a prophet, and he was a priest. He will be essentially used by God to change the nation from rulership by judges to rulership by kings. Samuel is used by God to anoint Saul as the first king of Israel. This begins the period in history of Israel known as the United Kingdom. Saul is not a particularly good king, and he loses favor with God. And David begins to gain favor with God. In this book, we also see the story of David and Goliath. Eventually, God rejects Saul as king and calls Samuel to anoint a second king, and that will be King David. David does not immediately assume the kingship, and at the end of 1 Samuel, we see the death of Saul. We now come into 2 Samuel. And in 2 Samuel, this is the reign of David. A number of significant things happen around David. For one thing, God tells David that the Messiah, who will be the Savior of the world, we know as Jesus Christ, will come out of the line of David. For another thing, David establishes Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and it remains the capital even till today. One of the other stories we might be familiar with is David's sin with Bathsheba, which was the low point of his kingship. But overall, the Bible is favorable to David. It calls him a man after God's own heart. At the end of 2 Samuel, David dies, and when we open up in 1 Kings, his son Solomon becomes king. Solomon is known as the wisest man to have lived up till that time. He is responsible for building the temple, which was designed by his father David. The Queen of Sheba comes to visit him and is overwhelmed by the beauty of the temple and all of Solomon's kingdom. Solomon starts out with a good heart for God. In his old age, Solomon falls away from the Lord, and as a punishment, God will divide the kingdom. But that will not happen until after his death. At Solomon's death, the kingdom is split between Rehoboam and Jeroboam. Rehoboam will rule over the southern kingdom, which will be the two tribes of Judah and Benjamin. His counterpart, Jeroboam, will rule over the other 10 tribes, which will become the northern kingdom. The southern kingdom is called Judah in the Bible. The northern kingdom is either referred to as Israel, Samaria, or Ephraim. Ephraim because of its largest tribe. From this point on, Israel will not refer to the whole kingdom, but refer only to the northern kingdom. Also in the book of 1 Kings, we are introduced to Elijah, who is a prophet of the northern kingdom. We are also introduced to perhaps the worst king of both tribes. That would be Ahab and his wife Jezebel, who rule in the northern kingdom. During the time of 1 Kings is the only time where the two tribes try to reunite, when Jehoshaphat is king of the southern kingdom and Ahab is king of the northern kingdom. We now come into the book of 2 Kings, where we see the continued ministry of Elijah. Eventually, Elijah would be called into heaven and be replaced by the prophet Elisha. 2 Kings records all the interactions between the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. In the northern kingdom, there are no good kings, and as a result, they are destroyed by Assyria in 722 BC, never to rise again. The southern kingdom, on the other hand, has several good kings, and as a result lasts 135 years longer. But it too falters in the end and is taken into exile to Babylon for 70 years. This is the first time they are made to leave the promised land. Now we come to the book of 1 Chronicles. 1 Chronicles recaps the story of the reign of David, which we see in 2 Samuel. It is written during the exile, and it emphasizes the good points of David's reign and the promises God has made to David so as to be an encouragement to those in the exile. 2 Chronicles is the recap of 1 and 2 Kings, with an emphasis on the kings of Judah. The kings of the northern kingdom are only mentioned as they interact with those of Judah. It again is to encourage the people, and it shows that God will bring them back from captivity back to the promised land. There are no historical or narrative books that covers the period of the 70-year exile, but we do gain some information about that period of time from two prophetic books, that of Daniel and Ezekiel. We now come to the book of Ezra. Ezra will lead the Jews back from captivity to the promised land. They are the Jews at this point, named after the southern kingdom's largest tribe, Judah. The northern kingdom, or those 10 tribes, have all now been destroyed. There will be several returns. Many of the people will remain in Babylon because they have established businesses and relationships. Ezra will lead the first 2 returns. And during his returns, he will rebuild the temple in Jerusalem, and he will reestablish the worship of God in Jerusalem. Another thing of note is that during that 70-year time of captivity in Babylon, Babylon is overcome by the Persians. And whereas the Jews entered into exile under Babylon, they now return to the promised land under the rule of Persia. We next come to Nehemiah. And Nehemiah will lead the final and third return of the exile into the promised land. He was a cupbearer to the king of Persia, which was an important office. He had to taste all the foods for the king to make sure that none were poisoned. Nehemiah leads the people back and reinforces and rebuilds the walls of Jerusalem, which was necessary to keep it protected. And the final book in the series of the narratives is Esther. Esther, as we mentioned before, occurs during the period of first and second return from the exile, which is recorded in the book of Ezra between chapters 6 and 7. We see in Esther where God prevents the annihilation of the Jews by Persia. It is crucial for the Jews to survive because God intends to bring the Savior of the world through them. And that wraps up the historical books. If you've missed any of the videos in this series, there's a link above or in the description below so that you can catch up. In the next video, we will be talking about the poetical or wisdom books. If you are enjoying this series, feel free to subscribe below. And until next time, God bless.